How did two outboard giants end up on opposite sides of history? The shocking difference between Mercury and Evinrude Outboards isn't just a story about engines. It's about how one inventor's quest for ice cream in 1906 sparked a revolution, while a rival's takeover of a dying propeller company in 1939 rewrote the rules of competition. Evinrude built its legacy on bold leaps and risky breakthroughs, Mercury on unbreakable reliability and relentless testing. But here's what most people miss. The very choices that made these brands famous would ultimately decide which one would survive and which would vanish. What really set these companies apart? And how did those differences change marine history forever? It all starts at the very beginning. Let me paint you a picture. Milwaukee, summer of 1907. Ole Evinrude, a Norwegian immigrant with grease under his fingernails, rows across Lake Okauchee to bring his fiancée some ice cream. By the time he gets back, the ice cream is a puddle. Most people would shrug and eat soup. Ole sketches an idea instead, a tiny engine you could clamp to a rowboat so no one would ever have to sweat for dessert again. That fall, he builds a working prototype. Patent application goes in November 5th, 1907. 2 years later, the first Evinrude Outboards hit the market, and a new era for boating begins. The world's first truly practical, detachable outboard motor, dreamed up because a man wanted to impress a girl. Now let's jump to January 1939, Cedarburg, Wisconsin. The Great Depression is still biting, and a small factory called Cedarburg Manufacturing is going under. Enter Carl Kiekhaefer. He's not looking to build boat engines. He just wants the plant for his magnetic separators, machines for the dairy industry. But when he takes inventory, he finds a warehouse full of defective outboard motors, branded Thor. Most folks would call the scrap dealer. Kiekhaefer can't stand the idea of junk with his name on it. He tears into the engines, redesigns them, and starts testing. Not just for reliability, but for speed. He's up all night running engines on the lake, pushing for more power, more endurance, more bragging rights. Within a year, the Mercury name debuts at the 1940 New York Boat Show, and suddenly, the racing world is paying attention. Two men, two origin stories. One builds to solve an everyday problem, the other to conquer every challenge in sight. Evinrude's DNA is all about usefulness and simplicity. Motors anyone can fix, built to last longer than the boat they're strapped to. Mercury's roots are pure engineering pride and competitive fire. If it isn't the fastest, it isn't done. These aren't just companies. They're the living reflections of the men who started them. And the choices they made, right from day one, set the stage for a rivalry that would shape the next 100 years of marine history. Here's where the rivalry hardens into something you can feel in your hands. Evinrude, from day one, built outboards with a single-minded mantra. Make it run forever. Make it simple enough for your uncle to fix with a wrench and a prayer. Ask any old-school mechanic and you'll get the same answer. Evinrudes were the engines you could drag through a swamp, forget to change the plugs, and they'd still fire up after a winter in the shed. The classic 9.9 from the 70s, that thing is the cockroach of outboards, still running on lakes from Minnesota to Maine, still getting handed down like family heirlooms. A mechanic in Duluth once told me, if you can't fix an Evinrude, you probably shouldn't own a boat. Mercury saw things differently. Carl Kiekhaefer wanted power, speed, a little bit of danger. Mercury motors were built to win races, not just outlast your patience. High revving, lightweight, packed with features nobody else dared put on an outboard. You didn't just buy a Mercury, you bought bragging rights. Their 6-cylinder tower of power wasn't just an engine, it was a statement. Mechanics would say, Mercury, you need a timing light, a manual, and sometimes a miracle. But if you wanted to leave everyone else in your wake, you picked black paint and red stripes every time. These philosophies weren't just marketing, they ran deep. Evinrude service manuals read like survival guides: how to fix it on the water, how to keep it running when everything else fails. Mercury service bulletins? More like speed recipes: how to squeeze another 5 horsepower, how to shave seconds off your whole shot. This split shaped everything that followed. Evinrude owners valued reliability, parts you could buy at the hardware store, and the confidence that a little know-how could solve any problem. Mercury owners wanted the edge, the thrill, the next upgrade. Both camps had their diehards, and neither would back down in a bar argument. So when you see a battered old Evinrude ticking away on a fishing boat, or a gleaming Mercury screaming past at full throttle, you're not just looking at 2 engines. You're seeing 2 worldviews in steel and aluminum, a contest between endurance and ambition, between fixing it yourself and pushing for more. And that's why this rivalry never really cooled down. It was never just about horsepower. It was about what you believed an engine should do. Now let me hit you with some facts that'll make your head spin. Mercury didn't just build engines, they tortured them. Karl Kiekhaefer believed that if you wanted to sell an outboard, it had to survive a trial by water, not just a spin on the showroom floor. Picture this: prototype engines bolted to test boats, churning away on a Florida lake at midnight, headlights glinting off the water. Drivers worked in shifts. The engines ran around the clock. If something broke, the whole team stayed until it was fixed. No excuses, no shortcuts, no sleep. Kiekhaefer kept a logbook of every failure, every redesign, every hour logged. Some engines racked up 50,000 miles, the equivalent of circling the globe twice, just to see what would break first. Mercury didn't care about babying their motors. They wanted to break them over and over until there was nothing left to break. One engineer, still grinning about it years later, told a reporter, "If it could survive Lake X, it could survive anything our customers could dream up." That's not just bravado. Mercury's engines were born in fire and water, then rebuilt stronger. When a part failed, it got redesigned. When that failed, it got replaced with something even tougher. The result? By the time a Mercury outboard made it to a dealership, it had already lived a harder life than most boaters would ever throw at it. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just about bragging rights. Dealers knew that when they sold a Mercury, they weren't gambling on a new design or hoping the latest gadget would hold up. They were selling a machine that had been run to the edge and back, with the scars to prove it. That's how Mercury built trust, one sleepless night and one broken crankshaft at a time. Customers noticed. By the 1960s, Mercury's reputation for reliability wasn't just marketing fluff. It was the result of a test culture so relentless that even the competition whispered about it. And the mandate came from the top. Kiekhaefer's orders were simple: every engine, race ready, no exceptions. That's why Mercury dealers could look a customer in the eye and promise, "This motor will outrun the next guy," and keep running long after he's paddling home. In an industry where failure could mean a ruined fishing trip or a long tow back to shore, that kind of confidence was worth its weight in gold. So when you hear the old stories about Mercury's midnight lake trials or the infamous Lake X torture tests, know this: every hour, every broken part, every sleepless night was an investment in trust. That's the real secret behind the black paint and red stripes. Not just speed, but the kind of reliability you can only earn by daring your own engines to fail and refusing to let them. Now here's where the story goes off the rails, and not in the fun midnight lake testing kind of way. In the mid-1990s, OMC, the parent company behind Evinrude, found itself staring down a loaded barrel. The EPA was tightening emissions rules, and 4-strokes were starting to look like the future. But OMC wasn't ready to give up the 2-stroke ghost. So they doubled down on a gamble called Ficht direct injection, a German-engineered system that promised cleaner, more powerful 2-strokes without all the smoke and stink. On paper, it looked like a moonshot. In practice, it was more like strapping a bottle rocket to a rowboat and hoping for the best. The rollout started in 1996. Ficht-powered 150s and 175s hit showrooms with glossy brochures and bold claims. Dealers lined up, early buyers signed checks. But the engines weren't ready. One OMC engineer, still shaking his head years later, put it bluntly. "We were told, get it out the door, we'll fix it later." What happened next is the stuff of corporate nightmares. The Ficht injectors, meant to deliver pinpoint fuel control, had a mind of their own. Spray patterns went haywire. Piston domes melted. Some engines detonated themselves into scrap on their maiden voyage. Mechanics started seeing the same failures over and over. Burnt pistons, fouled injectors, engines that coughed, sputtered, and died before the first fishing season was done. The fix-it bulletins from OMC came in a steady stream. New heads, updated injectors, software patches for the engine control units, but every patch seemed to open another wound. By 1998, the warranty claims were piling up faster than replacement parts could ship. Dealers fielded angry calls from customers whose brand new outboards had turned into expensive anchors. Some shops waited months for reimbursement. Lawsuits started brewing. And the recalls, oh the recalls. OMC issued formal recall notices in late 1998, but the technical problems just kept coming. One service manager described it as playing whack-a-mole with grenades. Inside the company, panic set in. Engineers scrambled to rewrite code, redesign injectors, and salvage what they could. But the damage was done. The Ficht name was radioactive. Dealers bailed to Mercury or Yamaha. Share prices collapsed. By 1999, OMC was bleeding cash, over $100 million in losses, and the Ficht recall spiral was dragging the whole company toward bankruptcy. The real gut punch? The engineers knew what was at stake. We'd built our whole reputation on engines you could trust, the same OMC veteran recalled. Now we were sending out ticking time bombs and hoping for the best. That's the catastrophic cost of shortcuts. In the race to leapfrog the competition, Evinrude bet the farm on unproven tech and paid for it with a century's worth of trust. Dealers, customers, and loyal mechanics, people who'd sworn by the blue and white for generations, watched the company they loved unravel, one failed injector at a time. Now here's the twist nobody saw coming. After the Ficht disaster nearly took Evinrude out for good, the engineers regrouped under new ownership and pulled off something wild. They called it E-TEC. Forget everything you think you know about smoky, finicky two-strokes. These engines were a different animal. Direct injection, digital engine control, and a 5-year warranty that didn't shrink with every season. The final G2 series? A 3.4-liter V6 that delivered more torque off idle than most 4-strokes could dream of. Owners started bragging about hole shots that snapped your head back, 3 years between scheduled services, and fuel economy that made the old carbureted models look like gas guzzlers. "It's the best engine I've ever owned," one guide told a trade magazine, "and I've run them all." Another swore his G2 pulled skiers like a diesel truck and still sipped gas. These weren't just claims. Independent tests backed them up. Cleaner emissions, better acceleration, and a maintenance schedule so light you could forget where the dealer was. For a brief, shining moment, Evinrude had built a 2-stroke that outclassed the competition in all the ways that mattered. But as the G2 found its groove, the rest of the industry had already fallen in love with 4-strokes. Timing, not technology, would decide the final chapter. In 2004, Mercury changed the rules of the game with one word: Verado. This wasn't just another outboard, it was the world's first production supercharged 4-stroke, and it hit the docks like a thunderclap. Boaters who had spent years arguing 2-stroke versus 4-stroke suddenly had a new question. How much boost do you want with that? The Verado's inline 6 paired with a belt-driven supercharger delivered torque everywhere in the rev range. For buyers, it meant instant throttle response, smooth cruising, and power that didn't run out at high speed. Dealers almost couldn't believe it. One told a reporter, "People walked in asking for a Yamaha or a Honda, but if we started a Verado in the shop, they changed their minds before lunch." Mercury didn't just build a new engine, they built a new category. The Verado was quieter than the old two-strokes, cleaner than anything Evinrude had on offer, and packed with digital controls that made rigging and driving feel like piloting a sports car. While Evinrude was still fighting to convince the world that two-strokes could be clean, Mercury was already selling the future. The Verado's launch didn't just win magazine shootouts. It won over dealers, boat builders, and most importantly, customers who were tired of waiting for the next recall notice. In a market hungry for reliability and low drama, Mercury's bet on the Verado paid off. The momentum was theirs, and everyone else was left scrambling to catch up. December 2000, Outboard Marine Corporation, the parent company behind Evinrude, files for bankruptcy. The numbers are brutal. Hundreds of millions lost. Warranty claims stacked higher than spare parts. One analyst summed it up like this: "The engineering didn't kill Evinrude, the business did." Years of bleeding cash from the Ficht fiasco left the company gasping. Dealers jumped ship. Mechanics who had sworn by blue and white now hung Mercury signs in their windows. Plants shuttered, paychecks bounced, and a century-old name became a line item in a bankruptcy court ledger. Fast forward to May 27, 2020. BRP, the Canadian owner who had tried to bring Evinrude back from the brink, pulls the plug for good. The factory in Sturtevant, Wisconsin goes quiet overnight. Employees, some with decades on the line, find out in a company-wide email. "It felt like a funeral," one former worker said. "We built engines we were proud of, but the world moved on." Dealers scramble to reassure customers that parts and service will continue, but the writing's on the wall. After 111 years, the brand that invented the outboard is gone. An industry analyst put it in plain terms: Mercury survived because they changed before they had to. Evinrude died because they ran out of time. In 1906, Ole Evinrude built the first practical outboard engine, an invention born from a simple desire to cross a lake for ice cream. Nearly a century later, Mercury's 2004 Verado launch and Evinrude's E-TEC G2 marked the last great battle in a rivalry shaped by opposite philosophies. The evidence shows Mercury's relentless testing and focus on reliability built a foundation of consumer trust, while Evinrude's bold innovations like Ficht and E-TEC pushed technical boundaries but exposed the company to greater risk. The 2000 OMC bankruptcy and Evinrude's 2020 shutdown, confirmed by BRP press releases, closed a chapter in marine history. Yet some internal engineering decisions remain classified, and the full story behind OMC's Ficht crisis is still debated. Today, Mercury's legacy endures in dealerships and on the water, while Evinrude's name survives in archives and collector engines. The record is clear. This was never just a race for horsepower, but a contest between two visions, one cautious and enduring, the other daring and ultimately undone.